Good evening. I am Kevin Strunk, and it is my honor to welcome you tonight to our annual Service of Remembrance. Although tonight we are coming to you by virtual streaming, hopefully next year we can return to the wonderful personal experience that my father Glenn Strunk envisioned when he began this annual celebration many years ago. Each and every one of us here this evening share a common bond, and that someone that we have known, someone we have cared about very deeply, and someone that we have loved dearly has died. So in the tradition of my father's commitment to you, our community family, tonight will be an evening of love, one of hope, and especially one of remembrance. This night is for you. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Linda Petrilla. I have been given the opportunity to speak to you. In March of this year, my dad, who is 96 years old, died at home with me from an illness of 1 year and 3 months. In October this year, my sister died quite unexpectedly and suddenly, and she had just turned 68 years of age. Like all of you, I am grieving the loss of those I love. We have all come face to face with the death of our loved ones, and the door to grieving has been opened before us. Grieving takes on a life of its own and becomes its own entity. It is true that grieving is a normal part of life, but it does not always feel normal, nor do we feel normal, and definitely not like the self that we always knew. This is a pattern to grieving, but there are no rules. We know the shock, full of unbelief, and like a bad dream from which we hope to awaken. The pain, both emotional and physical, the sadness, the loss of energy and motivation, exhaustion, guilt, anger, the what-ifs, the withdrawal from others and activities, the lack of focus, attention, concentration, the forgetfulness, and an emptiness inside. We can move from one emotional state of being to another with no warning. Tears and emotions may come like waves crashing over us. Then there are the first, as they are called, birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, times now without our loved ones. All the things we want to tell them or the questions we want to ask, the longing for them. And then our wondering, how long does this go on? We need to know it will not always be like this. At some point, it becomes important and necessary for us to walk forward silent when we want, to cry or laugh when we want, to join with others when we decide, to work or rest when we choose, to part with possessions when we're ready, to ask for help from others and to receive help from others. We come to a crossroads where we face a choice. Do we continue traveling this lonely, emotionally laden path through the motions of living, or do we travel a path that leads to life and true living? We know the first choice all too well, and it leads to the same joyless end. So our second choice of living life may be that we simply understand and believe, I can't go there again, because we acknowledge going there over and over digs a deeper rut of pain, is farther away from living, and the ending does not change. Memories are our gifts, unfolding all the years of laughter, joy, tears, and struggles. For we have been blessed to have this precious time with our loved ones, a beautiful treasure we will always keep in our heart. As a Christian, my belief and faith in God and my Savior Jesus Christ has given me the grace of comfort, peace, and strength during these times of grieving. As I have walked this journey of grieving, I have held the hand of my Lord, who has always provided for my needs. May you also be blessed with comfort, compassion, strength, and endurance, and peace during this time of grieving for your loved ones. In closing, I would like to quote Psalm 29:11, which says, "The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace."
When I know where I'm going, on the far side of the sky, the first thing that I'm gonna do is spread my wings and fly. I'm gonna land beside the lion and run my fingers through his mane. Or I might find out what it's like to ride and drive away. Yeah, when I get where I'm going, there'll be only happy tears. I will share the sins and struggles I have carried all these years. And I'll leave my heart wide open. I will love and have no fear. Yeah, when I know where I'm going, don't ever me down here. I'm gonna walk with my granddaddy and he'll match me step for step. And I'll tell him how I missed him every minute since he's left. And then I'll hug his neck. Yeah, when I get where I'm going, there'll be only happy tears. I will share the sins and struggles I have carried all these years. And I'll leave my heart wide open. Yeah. I will love and have no fear. Yeah, when I know where I'm going, don't drive me down here. There's so much pain and so much madness in this world we stumble through. All these questions I can't answer, and so much work to do. But when I get where I'm going, and I see my Maker's face, I'll stand forever in the light of his amazing grace. Yeah, when I hear where I'm going, oh yeah. Oh, when I hear where I'm going, no fear when I hear where I'm going. Yeah, when I hear where I'm going.
The tide recedes but leaves behind bright seashells on the sand. The sun goes down, but gentle warmth still lingers on the land. The music stops, and yet it echoes on in sweet refrains. For every joy that passes, something beautiful remains. Our hope tonight is that you will always remember the great memories you have created. Join us in remembering your loved ones. Glenn Allen Strunk, remembered by his loving family, friends, and all those he touched in his many years of dedicated service to our community. You left big shoes to fill. We love you. Patricia Martika, remembered by beloved husband Robert, children Gina, Deanne, and Robert Jr., grandchildren Stephanie, Christopher, Jessica, Melissa, Jackie, and Nicholas, and her loving sister Phyllis, Belle, and many great-grandchildren. Sarah J. McCurrier, remembered with love by Rose and Steve Johnson, Heather and Jason, Peter and Carolyn. Robert Lee Perry, remembered by daughter Robin, son-in-law James, and granddaughter Sophia. William J. Egan, remembered by wife Margaret, son Billy and wife Paula, daughter Patrice and husband Bill, daughter Angela and husband John, grandchildren Lindsay and husband Martin, Allison and Ryan Gilbert, and Alyssa Ingen. Larry E. Johns, remembered by wife Laura Johns, Deborah Nesbitt, and the Perez family. Charles Kimball, remembered by Laura and Bert Posada, and Alexandra and John Hillman. Karen Lee Kimball, remembered by Lori and Bert Posada, and Alexandra and John Hillman. Eugene Jean R. Cole, remembered by wife Doris, son Christopher and spouse Amelia, son Daniel and spouse Robert, granddaughters Kaylee and Alice, brothers Timothy and his wife Tracy, Peter and his wife Paula, sisters Barbara and her husband Brett, Nancy and Anita. Bridget Bevan, remembered by Alan, Diane and Rich, Ashley and Brooke, Candace and Lennox, Nicole, Brian and Alex, and the rest of the family, friends, and all of the pets, especially Foxy Lady. Carl D. Anderson, remembered by Brian Anderson and family, Susan Anderson and family, Glenn Anderson and family. John Morgan II, remembered by Ashley Jackson, Neil Jackson, Don Bucci, Alina Bucci, Robert McGoy, Nancy Morgan, and Anna Lewis. William V. Sweet Jr., remembered by wife Lorraine, son Bill, daughters Lori, Linda, and Cindy. Albert S. Cedroni, remembered as a very loving brother. Jeffrey Thomas Hart Jr., remembered by mother Debbie Ann Curry, sister Heather Ann Carroll, brother-in-law James Carroll, son Travis Cole Hart, Aunt Georgine Hart. David Ballmer, remembered by Debbie and Bruce Palmer, Pat and George Pellington. David was a loving husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Charles Henry Phillips, remembered by Maxine Ninsley, Glenda Phillips, Barbara Phillips, Charlotte Phillips Craig, and Charles Phillips II. Mary Elizabeth Dove, remembered by sons Bill and Charles, daughter Sally, grandchildren Alexandra, Carly, Emily, Martha, Jesse, great-grandchildren Penny, Rowan, Charlotte, Jamie, and Avery, and cousin Jenny Graves. Carl Rance, remembered by Ellen Rance, Mansoura and Dan Moy, Reza Tukalu, Nazarene Pimentel, Mr. and Mrs. Dean Rance, and Mr. and Mrs. John Kurwiski. Edgar Price by Mary Price, Eric Price and family, Ben Price, Joe Price and family, and Gary Price. Henry George Largy, remembered by wife Dorothy, sons Henry and Fred, granddaughters Aubrey, Lauren, and Alexandra, Natalie and Taylor, grandsons Freddie, Stephen, Gavin, Chris and James, and dear friend Sheila. Mary Ann Mahoney, remembered by Anita Arbo and April Mahoney. Reverend Charles Wesley Scragg Jr., remembered by Linda Petrilla, Chuck Scragg, Steve Scragg, Kevin Burgess, Lindsay and Mark Sinanci, Chase and Shanna Scragg, John Scragg, Chris and Tiffany Scragg, John and Elizabeth Scragg, and Patricia Lanham. Christine H. Schaefer, remembered by Michael Schaefer, Julie Ann Egu, Casey Ego, Theo Ifo, Valerie Schaefer, Karen Hansen, Kathleen Hansen, Michael Erickson, and Paul Hansen. Don Stanford Muleman, remembered by Diane, Brian, Dana, Lee, and Nancy. David H. Norrington, remembered by Mother Sandra Roma, Sister Sheila Denise Schrock, Sister Maura Ann McNair, daughter Sandra Carmen Norrington, nephew Scott Alexander McNair, and nephew Ryan Stewart McNair. Flory Roma, remembered by wife Sandra, daughters Lori and Sheila and Maura, granddaughters Angelina, Teresa, and Sandra, and grandsons Valentine, Scott, and Ryan. John J. Weber III, remembered by Carrie Weber, Nicole and David Bragg, and Jennifer Weber. Corey John Weber, remembered by Carrie Weber, Nicole and David Bragg, Jennifer Weber. Corey is a beloved son, brother, and great friend. Catherine May Brown Gardner Mall, remembered by Marty Gardner and Jody, Sam Gardner and Liz, Catherine McLaughlin, Jim John Gardner, and Amanda, and many grandchildren and their families. Father Richard Murphy, remembered by Debbie True, the staff and parishioners of Holy Cross Catholic Church, family and friends, and his faithful dogs. Ronald G. Help, remembered by and loved and terribly missed by his wife and family, especially his amazing grandson, Steve. Salvatore Leonardos, remembered by Alice, his children, 4 children, daughter Pauline and Dan Lenza, sons Salvatore Leonardos and Donna, daughter Lisa and Frank Houghton, daughter Gina and Lynn Valentino, as well as 8 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. Corporal Frank Shelton Strayhorn, remembered by Mother Sandra Stewart, Sister Crystal Strayhorn, Sister Megan White, and Brother Carl Stewart.
Grace Ann Nowinski, remembered by her husband Brian and her loved dog Lilianne, mother Linda and father-in-law David, daughter Wendy, sister Clara, brother Jeff and sister-in-law Jeanette, and all other family and friends. Charles William DeVoren, remembered by his wife Mary, sons Peter, Christopher, and Gregory, their spouses, his 9 grandchildren and their spouses, and his 7 great-grandchildren. Keith Cutting, remembered by Gloria, Joanna, Maurice, Richard, Stephen, Karen, and Genesis Church. Jean George Malassi. Remembered by Madeline Dallas, Marion and Mike Cherney, Susan Malassi, Jean and Jean Malassi, Andrew and Carol Malassi, Fred Malassi, 12 grandchildren and 21 great-grandchildren. Walter Muhlbauer, remembered by his wife Barbara, his son Gus, and daughter-in-law Vanessa, and his grandson Joshua. Gabrielle Improgo Chireko, remembered by Daddy Nelson, Mami Mavi, Ati Eli, and Kuoya Nico. Dolores Madeline Deal, remembered by her grandson Justin Deal. Bob B. DeGroat, remembered by Donald DeGroat and Kevin DeGroat. Vivian L. DeGroat, remembered by Catherine, Donald, and Kevin DeGroat. Ronald Dean DeGroat, remembered by Catherine, Donald, and Kevin DeGroat. Patrick Michael McAllister, Sr., remembered by Mother Eleanor, wife Betty, daughter Sharon, son Patrick, granddaughters Cheyenne, Alana, and Ava, grandson Neil, great-grandson Jackson, Alexander, Zechariah, and his mother's service dog, Rufus. Jack Odom, remembered by daughters Jessica and Christine, grandchildren Audrey, Jackson and Mary, and nephew Ron. Frank Barata, remembered by Ruth Koharski and Barata family. Dorothy Helen Hazelton, remembered by Sandy, Jeff, Laura, and Carly Howe, and Ann Barber. Doug Pomozel, remembered by Irene Pomozel, Steph and Darren Poggle, Debbie Posel, Ricky, Vicky, and Tom Reinschmidt, Rance and Graham McCone, grandsons Garrett, Eric, John, Peter, and Kyle, granddaughters Heather, Rachel, Shannon, Courtney, and great-grandchildren Morgan, Molly, Connor, and Tyler. Victor Nicholas Bagiak, remembered by wife Eleanor, granddaughter Sharon, grandson Patrick, great-grandson BJ, great-granddaughters Cheyenne, Alina, and Ava, great-grandsons Jackson, Alexander, and Zechariah, and stepdaughter-in-law Betty. Anki Hilga Humphrey. Remembered by Ronald Humphrey, Michael and Carla and family, Eric and Darla and family, Jason and Sarah, Reverend Robert and Brenda Williams, Reverend Raymond and Ann Warren, and Reverend Nathan and Augie Hanner. Donald Allen Rhodes, remembered by his wife Maria, son Sean, his wife Carol, grandchildren Shannon, Thomas, and Rebecca, step-grandchildren Anthony J., Julian Vega, Julian Batista, Yadia Supraveda, granddaughter Leila Supraveda, and her husband Robert, and many other family members and friends. Ryan Keith McPherson, remembered by his loving family and friends. William Bass Hunter, remembered by Betty, Loma, Bud, Bill, Terry, and his beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Henry Hank Rudolph Hebora II, remembered by his wife Barbara Hebora, his siblings, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends. Wayne Douglas Phillips, remembered by his loving family and friends. Anna Pearl Loudermilk, remembered by her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends. Oscar Gordon Loudermilk, remembered by his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, siblings, and friends. Jerry Thomas, remembered by Patty Thomas, Linda Thomas Bintz, Larry Thomas, Peggy Delk, and Bob Perry. Butch Dela Cruz, remembered by his wife Cheryl, daughter Katira, and many family and friends.
I am Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom. What an honor to be able to participate in this service of remembrance. One of my favorite readings, one of the pieces that I offer often in these times of memory, is very simple. At the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have a joy we crave to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are part of us as we remember them. I share those words with you, and here we are at the service of memory. It is easy or simple to think about our loved ones, to say their names, to have them in our heart. And yet that is not the fullest piece of memory. There is something more we can do, and that is why we stop to do these services of memory. In Jewish tradition, one of the things that we do is, even as we do say words of memory, even as we acknowledge the names of our loved one, we also take those thoughts, those feelings, and turn them into action. One of the rituals is called kriyah. It's called the tearing of the cloth. You're supposed to tear an article of clothing when a loved one dies. And it's beautiful because, first of all, it reminds us that the fabric of life is torn, and it is painful when the fabric of life is torn. But it also reminds us, with work, with labor, with love and care and acts of honor and memory, we can stitch together that tornness, that break in the fabric of our lives. Even when we know that there is a tear, we will see that that seam might be there. We can repair that damage, but we will always know that that tear has occurred. I match that with these words of memory, because it's our goal not just to think and not just to feel, but take the memory of our loved ones and turn it into a blessing of action. At the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember. At the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember. As long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember. When we have a joy we yearn to share, we remember. For long as we live, not just think and not just feel, but take their memory and turn it into the actions of our lives. So their memory is a blessing. For as long as we live, they too shall live, for they are part of us, the actions of our hearts, the actions of our hands. How we move through this world, they are part of us as we remember them. As I share that piece of Jewish tradition, I also honor your loved ones. Betty Ann Haltom Graves, remembered by Jim, her loving and devoted husband of 66 years, their children Debbie and her husband Mark, Becky and her husband Jim, Joe and his wife Carol, their grandchildren Matthew, Meredith, Jason, Megan, Kelly, Emily, Jimmy, Sarah, Sophia, and Rachel, and great-grandchildren Logan, Landon, Leighton, Lucas, Avery, Lennon, and Felicity, and brothers John and Otis, as well as many others. C.P. Cook, remembered by Mother Mary Jane Cook, Brother Jeffrey Cook, Sister Christine Cook, and son Charles Cook. Horace Berkeley Y. III. He's remembered by Dottie, Karen, David, Christy, Lizzie, Jesse, Daniel, Madeline, Rick, Matthew, Jane, Doug, Marcia, Sandy, Brenda, Rich, Karen, and Kim. Dana Rollerson, remembered by Mother Vicky and Stepfather Eric, Brother Kenny, Sisters Erica and Aaron, as well as aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. Jeff Neely, remembered by his loving wife, Joanna Neely. Joe Pashette, remembered by Tony, Megan, Jennifer, Eric, Aurora, Autumn, and Auden, Sissy, Ralph, and Bella. Sadie Pashette, remembered by Tony, Megan, Jennifer, Eric, Aurora, Autumn, and Auden, Sissy, Ralph, and Bella. Bill Pashette, remembered by Tony, Megan, Jennifer, Eric, Aurora, Autumn, Auden, Sissy, Ralph, and Bella. Linda Gale Kennard, remembered by her loving husband, Bill Kennard. Wesley Wagner, remembered by Sissy, Ralph, Bella, Tony, Megan, Jennifer, Eric, Aurora, Autumn, and Auden. John Jack Bernard Lynch, remembered by Marguerite, Denise, Suzanne, Michelle, Bill, and grandchildren Jack, Sawyer, Townsend, and Dylan. Albert Anthony Del Tufo Jr., remembered by wife Susan Del Tufo, daughter Nicole Del Tufo, and son Albert Del Tufo III. Kenneth E. Hamilton, remembered by his loving family and friends. John B. Johns, remembered by his wife, grandchildren, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and his friends. Mary Jo Essay, remembered by Timothy Essay Sr., Timothy Essay Jr., and Thomas Essay. Joseph Hagedus IV, remembered by his wife Barbara, children Donna, Gary, and Brenda, and stepchildren Nancy, John, Jay, and Mark. Robert White, remembered by Bob, Maeve, Jacqueline, Shannon, and Megan. Donald E. Judge, remembered by wife Winifred, daughter Madeline, son-in-law Robert, son Michael and daughter-in-law Marianne, son Patrick and daughter-in-law Becky, as well as 8 grandchildren. Michael G. DeWitt, remembered by daughters Kristen Harris and Susan DeWitt, son David DeWitt, and grandchildren Vance, Brooke, Hunter, David, and Emerson. William Walter Ray, remembered by Holly and Allison. Michael A. Kamau, remembered by Joyce Newsom, Martha Lewis, Bob, and David Klein. Leroy R. James, remembered by wife Quinette and sisters Yvonne, Beatrice, and Catherine, brother Lonnie, children Reggie, Brandon, Cleveland, and Bertha, plus grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, mother-in-law, aunties and uncles, sister-in-law, brothers-in-law, and very good friends. Yvonne Rachel Primus, remembered by husband Kenrick, sons Ken, Mark, Sheldon, daughters Jacqueline and Andrea, sister Shirley, 11 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. Ronnie Butler, remembered by wife Lauren, granddaughters Erica, Anya, Ryan, Taylor, and Riley, sons Eric, Evan, Brian, stepson Eric Dupuy, as well as many more family and friends. Jeremy St. McAuliffe, remembered by Mom and Dad, Katie, Robbie, Peter, Sean and family, Sherry, Drew, Joseph and family, Patrice and family, Brian and family, Kelly and family, John and family, Shannon and family, Alice Martello, Shai Bishara, Emily and family, and James and family. John George Malik, remembered by Naji Malik, Christy Collins, Alexis Sparrow, Melissa Rodriguez, and all other loving family members and dear friends. Ellen Powers, remembered by Jay, Kenny, Johnny, Lillianne, Jillian, Josh, and Avery. Ruth Betty Seidenfuss Douglas, remembered by Kathy Brandis, Judy Bakos, Mark Erickson, Kathy Pogden, Butch and Mary Seidenfuss. Jacob Davidson, remembered my mother Tina, grandmother Barbara Coffey, Uncle Ed, cousin Savannah, and so many other family members and many friends. Rodney D. Maxwell, remembered as a beloved husband, son, brother, uncle, and friend. Sarah Cottrell, remembered by loving husband, parents, siblings, nieces, nephews, and friends. Frederick Clemens Braun Jr., MD, remembered by his wife Carol, his 6 children, 2 stepchildren, 14 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. George Ellison Douglas, remembered by his wife of 35 years Edna, son James and wife Beverly, daughter Janet and husband Jeffrey, stepdaughters Debbie, Carol, Rebecca, stepsons Edward, Mike, brother Daryl, sisters Barbara and Betty, 14 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren.
The shortest verse in the Bible is John 11, verse 35, where it just simply says, Jesus wept. Jesus wept at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. He wept for 3 reasons. First, the compassion and the love that he had for a friend. Second, he wept because of the unbelief of not only Mary and Martha, his sisters, but also the people. Jesus told them in verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. And the third thing, Jesus wept because people forgot what he could do for them in the future. The beauty for us as we remember these precious brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, friends, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews that have gone on, that as long as they believed in Jesus, they're in an eternity of heaven. Loretta Mary Willett, remembered by Dean Myers, Danny Myers, Kathleen Jericho, Gary Myers, Bernard Russ, Richard Russ, Rosalie Russ, Will Jerk, and Julie Hawes. Frank Scott Kane, remembered by son Brandon, mother Edna, father Edward, sisters Carol, Debbie, and Rebecca, brothers Edward and Mike, stepbrothers James, stepsister Janet, and his beloved granddaughter Emery. Tabitha Jean Bromwell, remembered by her 3 loving daughters, mother, sister, 4 grandsons, 3 granddaughters, cousins, nieces, nephews, and a host of friends. Sharon Milton, remembered by her husband, Bob, son David, and daughter-in-law, Alana Schofield. Shelby Decker Flood, remembered by sons Justin and Colton Flood, mother Gina Lynn Colvin, grandparents Tom Collin and Patty, and Sharon Turner and Dennis, Carol Decker, brother Austin Decker, sisters Emily and Megan Gow, niece Victoria Glover, uncle Brian Colvin, aunt Maggie Turner and Wayne, and cousins Chris and Kyle Turner. Diane J. Smith, remembered by Al Smith and her 3 loving daughters. Stephen Jean Decker, remembered by mother Gina, sisters Megan and Emily, brother Austin, grandparents Tom and Patty, and Sharon and Denise, grandmother Carol, niece Victoria, nephews Justin and Colton, uncle Brian, aunt Angie, and her husband Wayne, and cousins Chris and Kyle. James J. Hinkle, and to me he will always be Brother Hinkle, remembered by his wife Annette, 5 children and their spouses, Mark and Shelley Hinkle, Hugh and Rebecca Boinke, John and Sandy Hinkle, Matthew and Sheila Hinkle, Tim and Esther Hopwood. Paul Nathaniel Aldridge, remembered by his wife Marlene, his 5 children, his 14 grandchildren, and his 33 great-grandchildren. Pablo Ocampo Bustamante, remembered by his loving wife, son, daughter, brother, and a host of friends. Mark E. Lawrence, remembered by his loving wife, Rebecca. Joyce Mary Bogine Postolete, sons, remembered by sons Richard, Ronald, and wife Pamela, David and wife Chrissy, daughters Sandra and husband Rusty, Catherine and husband Mike, sister Bonnie and husband Don, and brother Jim. Lindy Lou Green Dixon, remembered by Michelle and family, Kelly and family, Jerry and family. Carolyn Lansing McClooney, remembered by Lynn and Tony Buford, Elizabeth and John Collins and family, Michelle and Bo Buford and family, and Lance Buford. Harold Kurt Hamill, remembered by daughter Karen and Larry, granddaughter Lauren and Dan, great-granddaughters Alexis and Ellie, son Kent and Priscilla, granddaughters Corey and Wesley, Nikki and Sam, sister Elle and Ron Nielsen, niece Susan, Mike, Gregory and David, nephew Doug and Donna, and life companion Nellie. Jose Kiko Romero, remembered by Trina, Stephen, Luna, Sebastian, Brandon, and Austin. Juana Vargas, remembered by her children, Gina, Gigi, Gary, and their families, sister Nareda, Rachel and Rosa, many nieces and nephews, her church family, and friends. Michael Hurst, remembered by Bobby, Summer, Larry, Ben, Sarah, Brooke, Eddie, Corey, Kaylee, Brendan, Donnie, Ann, Lonnie, Darlene, Jim, Gina, Keith, Nancy, and grandchildren. Bart J. Pastorelli, remembered by his loving wife, children, grandchildren, siblings, and a host of family and friends. Mitris Black Holmes, remembered by her daughters, Carol Black and Marty Black, her son, Bill, and daughter-in-law, Christine, and 4 granddaughters. Joseph Albert Fargrego, remembered by his loving family and friends. Peter Eugene Sarcone, remembered by Peter and Karen Zarcone, Thomas Zarcone, Diane and Wyatt Zarcone. Joan Ann Zarcone, remembered by Peter and Karen Zarcone, Thomas Zarcone, and Diane and Wyatt Zarcone. Helen Farugijo, remembered by her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and wonderful friends. Edward Gustav Wesendorf, the Great One, remembered by his wife Beverly, daughter Kelly, Booth, and Dan, their children, Joseph Jessica Oganeski, and their children, Delaney and Joey, Sherry Booth and Courtney Booth, and Taylor, and her son Hayden, son Frederick Wessendorf, and Kelly, and their children, Brendan Wessendorf, and his children, Jasmine and Eddie, Corey Wessendorf, and Kayla, and their children, Alexander and Mason, sisters Geraldine Clute and Harry, and Beatrice Wilkinson, many nieces and nephews, and his best friend Tazzy. Irene Cora Molina, remembered by Pablo and wife Maria, Raul and Ricky, Jose and wife Nancy, Clifford and wife Juanita, daughters Sonia and Pamela, brother Clifford, grandsons Clifford and Jose, granddaughters Navaya, Angelia, Kaylin, and Elizabeth, and great-grandson Petro. Pablo T. Molina, remembered by sisters Tomista, Paich, Nellie, his 6 children, and their families. Mary L. Corliss, remembered by her daughters and son-in-law, Cindy and Scott Fink, as well as Mindy and Daniel Height. Elizabeth Sarshanini Bood, remembered by her loving family and friends, Danielle Nicole Height Call, remembered by Deborah Height, Christian Call, Caitlin Call, James Vanderhoff, Monique Height, David Height, Mildred Waterfield, Colleen Butler, and all her nieces and nephews. Terry Ann Harris, remembered by daughter Sarah and husband Kevin, Amber and husband John, Hannah and husband Brent, grandchildren Layla, Corbin, Ryan, Ellie, Abigail, Cora, Bryce, and Michaela, sister Cindy, brother Arthur, nieces and nephews, Becky, Evan, Brittany, AJ, Lee, Natalie, Jacob, Brandon, and Ellie, and also many beloved friends and family. David Bales Menus, remembered by his loving wife Honey, son Peter and wife Jill, son Pavo and wife Suzanne, daughter Robin and husband Jonas, granddaughter Brianna, and grandson Jonathan.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God and Savior has ransomed me, and
we would like to end this evening's program by recognizing and thanking all of the clergy in our community for their very special ministry to families who have lost loved ones. We would particularly like to thank the participating ministers and performers in tonight's program. Most of all, we would like to thank you, all of you who are watching via the internet, and for sharing with us this service of remembrance. Thank you.